Have you ever felt something snap inside you? A moment where your heart races, your breath shortens, and you're no longer the person you thought you were. A sudden burst of anger that hijacks your mind, controls your words, and leaves behind a trail of regret you can't sweep away. Maybe it happened during an argument with someone you love, or while reading a toxic comment online, or when a stranger disrespected you and your instincts screamed to retaliate. But what if there was a different way? What if, instead of reacting, you could respond with power, not passive, not submissive, but a calm so grounded, so unshakable, that it disarms any attack, a presence that transforms conflict into clarity? That's not fantasy. That was the mission of the Stoics, the ancient warriors of emotional mastery. They didn't suppress anger, they studied it. They trained for it, because they knew that uncontrolled rage can ruin relationships, shatter reputations, and even cost lives. But they also believed that if you learn to tame that fire, you can use it to fuel courage, to uphold justice, to gain wisdom. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, once reminded himself, "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it." This is not about becoming numb or emotionless. This is about becoming free. Welcome to the Stoic Lighthouse, where ancient wisdom lights the way to modern strength. Here, we bring you timeless insights from thinkers like Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, and connect them with modern voices like Ryan Holiday, Donald Robertson, and William B. Irvine, all translated into real tools for the challenges you face today. And among those modern voices, one stands out when it comes to discipline under fire: former Navy SEAL and leadership expert Jocko Willink. His mantra is simple but unbreakable: discipline equals freedom. This mindset is pure Stoicism in action. Because freedom is not doing whatever you want, it's choosing how to respond, especially when the world tries to push you off balance. If this already resonates with you, take a moment, hit the like button, and subscribe now. This is your weekly dose of inner power, sharpened by reason, forged in reflection. Now, prepare yourself. Today's journey is not about controlling the world around you. It's about mastering the world within. We begin with a lesson from a man who lost all external freedom, but found something far greater: a former slave who became a master of himself. Number 1. Distinguishing what's in your control. Imagine you're sitting in traffic. You're late for an important meeting. A driver cuts you off, nearly clipping your bumper. Your blood pressure spikes. You grip the wheel tighter. Your mind races with insults you'll never say out loud, or maybe you do. Now ask yourself, what changed because of that anger? Nothing. That person is still gone. The traffic hasn't moved, and now your focus is wrecked. The Stoics taught that true power comes from one foundational idea: learning to separate what you can control from what you can't. This isn't a motivational quote, it's a mental operating system. According to Epictetus, some things are within our control and some things are not. This single sentence was the cornerstone of his teachings and of Stoic freedom. Because when you waste your energy trying to command things beyond your influence, the weather, traffic, people's opinions, the past, you're handing over your power. Instead, Stoics trained themselves to master the only domain they truly owned: their thoughts, their actions, their reactions. Chrysippus, one of the original architects of Stoic logic, saw reason not as an intellectual luxury, but as the weapon of the wise. He believed that a rational mind, aligned with nature, could remain unshaken even amidst storms of insult or misfortune. Nothing is more powerful than a mind committed to peace. Thousands of years later, the same principle has resurfaced in modern psychological approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy, and in the writings of William B. Irvine, who reframed Stoicism for the 21st century. William B. Irvine reminds us, anger is like a hot coal you hold to throw at someone, but you're the one who gets burned. This insight reveals something most people miss. Anger doesn't fix the problem. It adds fuel to it, and often you're the one left in the ashes. Even centuries before Epictetus, the philosopher Heraclitus had already hinted at this. Everything flows, nothing stands still. This means not only the world around you, but your own state of mind. Emotions rise and fall, circumstances shift, and peace is not found by controlling the storm, but by choosing how you sail through it. The practical exercise is simple, but it changes everything. When you feel the heat rising, when you're disrespected, interrupted or insulted, pause and ask, does this fall within my control? If the answer is yes, act with calm intention. If the answer is no, let go with dignity. This is not weakness, this is discipline. Ryan Holiday, one of today's most well-known Stoic authors, reinforces this mindset with surgical clarity. You don't control the world, but you control how you respond to it. That's where all your power is. This mindset doesn't just help you survive pressure, it helps you rise above it. So next time someone tests your patience, remember, you are not traffic. You are not their insult. You are not the chaos around you. You are what you choose to do next. Number 2, anticipating triggers. Premeditatio Malorum. What if you woke up today expecting the worst? Not in fear, not in paranoia, but in calm, strategic clarity. What if, before stepping out the door, you told yourself, someone might try to embarrass me, someone might lie, a client might cancel, traffic might make me late, a loved one might disappoint me? Would that make your day darker? Or would it make you stronger? The Stoics believed it made you invincible. They had a name for this, Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. A daily practice of imagining what could go wrong, not to live in dread, but to prepare the mind for life as it is, unpredictable, imperfect, sometimes cruel. According to Seneca, all that can happen to any man can happen to me. This mindset turns pain into preparation. It transforms emotional fragility into mental armor. Seneca wasn't telling his students to expect misery. He was teaching them how to face reality without illusions and without breaking. Most people are blindsided by pain, not because it's unbearable, but because they never considered it was coming. And that shock is what turns stress into rage. James Stockdale understood this like few in history. A U.S. Navy pilot shot down and captured during the Vietnam War. He spent over 7 years in a brutal prison camp, often in solitary confinement, tortured repeatedly. His survival strategy? The Stoicism of Epictetus. James Stockdale once said, "I never lost faith in the end of the story, but I also confronted the most brutal facts of my current reality." This is pure premeditatio malorum in action. He didn't lie to himself with false hope. He mentally rehearsed the worst, so when it arrived, he was already ahead of it. Modern Stoics still teach this. Donald Robertson, in his work with veterans and CEOs, uses visualization as a tool to weaken the emotional grip of negative events. And Sharon Labelle, in her modern interpretation of Epictetus, says that Stoicism is not about avoiding life's chaos, but meeting it with clarity and grace. Sharon Labelle writes, "When we practice imagining hardship, we're not inviting it. We're rehearsing strength. Think about how this flips your perspective. If you already considered betrayal, how could it surprise you? If you expected rejection, how could it define your worth? If you saw the storm coming, why panic when it hits? You don't train to fight during the attack, you train before. You train your emotional reflexes to stay grounded while others lose control." Ryan Holiday reinforces this through one of his most powerful principles. The obstacle is the way. In other words, it's not just about surviving misfortune, it's about using it, transforming every insult, every delay, every loss into a new layer of self-mastery. So how do you practice Premeditatio Malorum? Start your day by closing your eyes for 60 seconds. Picture 3 challenges that might come your way: a disrespectful colleague, a family argument, a plan that falls apart. Now, rehearse your response, not your reaction. How would the wisest version of you act? This isn't negativity, this is mental resilience. Kevin Vost, psychologist and author who bridges Stoicism with modern psychology, explains that preparing for adversity isn't about being negative, it's about avoiding emotional ambush. When you anticipate what might go wrong, you take away its power to control you. And, as Kevin Vost puts it, don't just prepare your schedule, prepare your soul. Number 3, creating space between stimulus and response. Someone insults you, a driver cuts you off, your phone buzzes with bad news. What happens next? Do you react instantly and with anger, sarcasm, defensiveness, or do you pause and choose your response? That split second, between what happens to you and what you do about it, is where all your power lives. It's the most overlooked skill in modern life, and the Stoics treated it as sacred ground. Epictetus taught that it's not events themselves that disturb us, it's our interpretation of those events. Epictetus reminded his students, it's not things that upset us, but our judgment about them. This teaching is revolutionary, even today, because it means no one can truly make you angry. They can provoke you, but the rage, that's yours. And if it's yours, you can control it. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled an empire and his own mind, practiced this discipline daily. He reminded himself not to be swept away by impulses, especially when insulted. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Strength for the Stoics was not about dominating others, it was about not being dominated by yourself. And that strength is built in silence, a moment of breath, a second of stillness, a pause between trigger and retaliation. This isn't passivity, it's strategy. John Sellers, one of the leading academic voices in modern Stoicism, explains that Stoic practice begins with observation. Not action, not resistance. Observation, watching the emotion rise without becoming it. In his words, to live stoically is to pay attention, to notice the impulse and choose not to obey it blindly. This is the opposite of how most people live today. Social media rewards instant reactions. The news cycle rewards outrage. Algorithms reward your anger. But the Stoic rewires the pattern. He breathes, he observes, he chooses. Modern Stoic thinkers like William B. Irvine echo this timeless idea that we gain freedom not by avoiding emotions, but by mastering the moment before they control us. William B. Irvine wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response." Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL and high-performance coach, transforms this idea into action with brutal simplicity. Discipline equals freedom. And that discipline starts right here. In the second you feel heat in your chest, tightness in your jaw, the urge to lash out, that second is your battlefield. Don't lose it, train it. The next time someone pushes your buttons, don't give them control. Give yourself a pause. Feel the fire, but don't fan the flames. Instead, ask, what response aligns with my values? What would a Stoic do right now? James Stockdale, tested in the darkest corners of human cruelty, held to this principle in prison, under torture, with his freedom stripped away. But even then, he wrote, "The one thing they couldn't take from me was my ability to decide how to respond." This is the core of Stoic power, not suppression, but sovereignty. Practice it. Own that space, because it's not just a pause, it's your freedom. Number 4, reframing the offense, rational reinterpretation. Think about the last time you felt truly offended, not just annoyed, but pierced, humiliated, disrespected. Maybe someone gave you a cold look. Maybe they dismissed your effort with a passive-aggressive comment. Maybe they left you out. But here's the truth. Many times what hurt you didn't actually come from them. It came from the meaning you gave to what they did. A glance became rejection. A silence became contempt. A disagreement became betrayal. The Stoics understood this psychological trap long before it had a name. Chrysippus, one of the early architects of Stoic thought, taught that virtue is achieved when the rational part of the soul governs over emotion. He believed that misjudging an event emotionally was a sign that the rational mind had lost command. Chrysippus wrote, "Virtue consists in the soul being in a state of harmony, where reason rules. And that harmony begins by questioning your first reaction." Pierre Hadot, a modern scholar of Stoic practice, emphasized that philosophy was not merely about reading or debating, it was a daily discipline. For him, reframing events was an essential exercise in achieving inner freedom. Pierre Hadot said, "We must constantly work to change our internal judgments, because that is where suffering hides." This isn't abstract theory. This is daily survival. The wrong glance, the wrong tone, the forgotten thank you. Any of these can spark a spiral of unnecessary rage if you don't interrogate your own perception. Sharon Lebel, in her modern interpretation of Stoic ideas, reminds us that we are often the authors of our own pain. Sharon Lebel wrote, "Sometimes the offense lives entirely in your mind, fed by assumptions that may not be true." And Kevin Vost, integrating Stoicism with contemporary psychology, advises a simple cognitive tool. Ask yourself, what else could this mean? That question interrupts the ego. It creates space for reason. And reason, according to Stoic tradition, is what separates the wise from the wounded. Could their cold tone mean they had a bad day? Could their rudeness reflect their pain, not your worth? Could their silence be a defense mechanism, not disrespect? Reframing doesn't mean you excuse injustice. It means you don't give it power over your mind. Even Aristotle, although outside the Stoic school, offered a timeless standard. Anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not easy. And that's exactly why the Stoic trains. So the next time offense rises like a wave, you don't drown in it. You ride it. You watch it. You choose how far it goes, because the meaning is yours to decide, and meaning is everything. Number 5. Seeing the offender as ignorant, not evil. Let's face it, when someone wrongs us, our instincts scream one thing: they meant to hurt me. We jump to conclusions. We assume malice. We project intention. And just like that, our mind builds an enemy out of a human. But the Stoics warned against this trap, because seeing people as evil feeds our rage. Seeing them as ignorant frees us from it. Musonius Rufus, the Roman Stoic master known for his sharp ethical teachings, believed that the true test of character was not how we dealt with friends, but with adversaries. And that retaliation wasn't a sign of strength. It was a sign of inner weakness. Musonius Rufus said, "It is not a mark of greatness to defeat another, but to conquer the urge to defeat." This idea isn't soft. It's strategic, because when you view someone as evil, you become emotionally entangled. Your anger grows. Your clarity fades. But if you see their offense as a result of confusion, ignorance, or even inner pain, suddenly you're no longer a victim. You're the one in control. Dio Chrysostom, a Stoic-influenced philosopher of the 1st century, once argued that most wrongdoing comes not from cruelty, but from blindness to the good. People lash out not because they are powerful, but because they are lost. James Stockdale, again facing real brutality as a prisoner of war, credited this insight for preserving his sanity. The Vietnamese guards who beat him weren't monsters in his eyes. They were tools of a system they didn't fully understand. James Stockdale said, "I saw my captors not as evil but as trapped, just like I was. That allowed me to maintain my humanity." That shift in perception made all the difference. Modern Stoic scholars agree. John Sellers notes that seeing others through the lens of ignorance allows us to respond with patience rather than vengeance. It's not about moral superiority, it's about not sinking to the same level. John Sellers writes, "The Stoic doesn't pity the offender with condescension, but sees their error as a call for greater wisdom, not greater wrath." This principle isn't about being passive or letting injustice go unchecked. It's about not letting it infect you. As Pierre Hadot puts it, philosophy must be lived, especially when it's hardest, and the hardest moment to live stoically is when someone attacks you unfairly. But that's where greatness begins. Sharon Lebel reinforces this mindset in simple terms. When we understand others are confused or hurting, it becomes easier to choose peace over pride. And Kevin Vost brings this closer to home. Instead of asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" ask, "What does this teach me about myself?" That question changes everything. It shifts your focus from blame to growth, from reaction to reflection. And most of all, it breaks the chain of anger. The truth is, most people who offend you don't even realize it. They're stuck in their own unresolved pain, their own distorted lens, their own limited training. You don't need to fix them. You don't need to fight them. You need to understand them, not to excuse, but to elevate. So next time someone lashes out, don't meet them at their level. Rise above it. Stand still while their chaos flails, because nothing is more terrifying to the irrational than someone who doesn't flinch. That's not surrender. That's power. Number 6, remembering impermanence. Memento Mori. Imagine this. You're enraged. Your fists are clenched. Your thoughts are spiraling. You're ready to cut someone off, quit, explode. Now picture yourself at the end of your life, looking back, alone, quiet, breathing slowly. Will this moment of rage still matter? Will the insult, the delay, the offense still hold any weight? The Stoics believed the answer to that question was the secret to peace. They practiced a daily reflection known as Memento Mori. Remember, you must die. Not to be morbid, but to stay grounded, to see clearly, to never waste precious life on meaningless emotions. Seneca urged this discipline in every one of his letters. He saw death not as a tragedy, but as a teacher, the most honest one of all. Seneca said, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." That contradiction is where most suffering lives. We fear loss, yet we act as if we'll live forever, wasting our energy on outrage, holding grudges, chasing ego. Marcus Aurelius, though not cited here again, meditated daily on death, not to retreat from life, but to make his actions sharper, his emotions cleaner. In the modern era, Pierre Hadot explained Memento Mori as a spiritual exercise, not a fixation on death, but a deep reminder of what truly deserves your time, your attention, and your outrage. Pierre Hadot wrote, "To remember death is to remember what is essential, its clarity in its purest form." Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of raw honesty, echoed this with an edge of bitterness. For him, life was a pendulum between pain and boredom, and only a sober view of impermanence could keep us from being ruled by petty emotions. Arthur Schopenhauer said, "Knowing that life ends is not reason for despair, but for lucidity. When you remember that every person you argue with will die, that every grudge will dissolve, that every wound will fade, something shifts inside you. The insult becomes dust, the offense becomes noise, and your rage loses its grip. This is not detachment, it's awakening." Kevin Vost, merging Stoicism with psychology and faith, speaks of death as a compass, a way to direct your energy toward what matters most. In his words, death is not the end of the conversation, it's the frame that gives meaning to everything we say. Think about how much of your anger is rooted in the illusion of permanence. You act as if that mistake at work will define your career, as if that rude comment will echo forever, as if this argument will live longer than you do. But the truth is, It won't. Nothing stays. Everything flows. As Heraclitus taught centuries before the Stoics even existed, Heraclitus wrote, "All is flux, nothing abides." Understanding that changes how you react. It doesn't make the world kinder, but it makes you wiser. So next time rage rises in your chest, imagine yourself 5 years from now, 10. At the end of your life, will this still matter? Will this be worth carrying? Or will it be one more thing you wish you had let go? Memento Mori doesn't make you fear death. It teaches you how to live, and to live well is to rise above what doesn't matter. Number 7, self-mastery as the highest virtue. In a world obsessed with domination over others, over money, over success, the Stoics chased a different kind of power, domination over themselves. For them, the greatest victory wasn't on a battlefield, in a boardroom, or on a stage. It was behind the eyes, in the private war between reason and impulse. And when anger takes control of you, you lose that war. Chrysippus, the Stoic who structured the ethical core of the philosophy, didn't see virtue as a decoration of the soul. He saw it as alignment, when your actions, thoughts, and emotions serve a single purpose: inner harmony. Chrysippus wrote, "The virtuous person is one whose soul is in agreement, not torn by contradictions." That agreement, that consistency, only happens through self-mastery. Musonius Rufus, the mentor of Epictetus, believed that all other virtues depend on this one. You can't be brave without self-control. You can't be just if your emotions rule you. You can't be wise if you obey every urge. And you certainly can't overcome anger if it always makes the decisions for you. Musonius Rufus said, "To rule yourself is the highest form of leadership. No command over others matters without command over your own soul." Self-mastery was the Stoics' definition of freedom, because if you're ruled by cravings, fear, or rage, how are you free? William B. Irvine explains this clearly for our time. He sees self-discipline not as restriction, but as liberation, the removal of unnecessary suffering. William B. Irvine teaches, the Stoic strives to control not the world, but his desires and aversions. In that lies true independence. This hits even harder in the modern age, where we're trained to indulge every emotion instantly, to explode, to vent, to post without pause. But Stoicism is rebellion against this trend. Jocko Willink reframes it with his iconic clarity. Discipline equals freedom. And that discipline begins with emotional restraint. You don't need to suppress your anger, but you must decide what it will become. You must own it, not be owned by it. Kevin Vost, weaving together philosophy and psychology, puts it like this: mastery of the self is the first defense against manipulation, by others and by your own impulses. In other words, the moment you lose control of your inner world, you become easy to control from the outside. Sharon Lebel adds yet another angle. She suggests that self-mastery is not about becoming stone, but about becoming deliberate. Sharon Lebel writes, "The Stoic doesn't react to life. He shapes his character through it." And John Sellers, bridging ancient texts with modern living, reminds us that practicing virtue is less about perfection and more about persistence. Self-mastery is built one moment at a time, one choice at a time, one breath at a time. Every time you feel rage and choose not to be swallowed by it, you win. Every time you hold your fire, think clearly, act with dignity, you win again. Not against others, against the chaos within. That's the game Stoicism teaches us to play. Not to become cold, but to become composed. Not to become numb, but to become unshakable. Because the man who rules himself cannot be ruled by anything else. Number 8. Transmuting anger into just action. Anger is one of the most misunderstood emotions in the human experience. It's not always evil. It's not weakness. And despite what many assume, It's not unstoic to feel angry. Anger is the body's alarm system. It tells us that something isn't right, that a value has been violated, a boundary crossed, a line disrespected. But alarms aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to alert you, so you can act wisely. Seneca warned that while anger might start with a spark of justice, it rarely ends there. Left unchecked, it becomes its own master, a tyrant that demands chaos. Seneca said, "No passion so robs the mind of all its powers of acting and reasoning as anger." That's the paradox. Anger begins with clarity but ends in blindness. So the Stoics didn't tell you to suppress it, they challenged you to shape it. Chrysippus, who helped define Stoic ethics, saw the passions not as enemies, but as forces to be brought under the rule of reason. Chrysippus wrote, "The soul in harmony is not free of passion. It directs passion toward virtue." And that's the key. The raw energy of anger can be fuel for courage, but only when it's guided, never when it's unleashed. Think of real life. A partner forgets something important. You explode. A stranger cuts you off. You curse, you chase, you grip the wheel as if your life is under attack. A co-worker takes credit for your idea, and your mind spins with revenge, not resolution. None of those reactions solve the problem. Now picture a different version of you, one trained by Stoic clarity. You feel the heat rise, but you don't act on it. You pause, you breathe. You question the story your ego is telling you, and then you act, not to punish, but to restore order. That is Stoic fire. James Stockdale lived this principle in conditions most of us can't imagine. Imprisoned, tortured, isolated, he felt the natural rage of injustice, but he didn't let it consume him. He let it refine him. James Stockdale said, "Self-discipline, reinforced by philosophical understanding, was the only tool I had to prevent emotional collapse." That's the transformation, from collapse to command. Modern Stoic Donald Robertson teaches that anger must pass through the lens of reason before it can be trusted. He compares it to a wild horse, powerful but deadly without training. Donald Robertson wrote, "Anger is not an enemy, but a test. If it leads you closer to wisdom, it has value. If it leads you away from reason, it's a trap." John Sellers goes further, pointing out that Stoic ethics were never about avoiding conflict. They were about engaging in conflict correctly. He writes, "The Stoic is not passive. He resists evil, but with clarity, not chaos." That's why modern leaders, coaches and warriors embrace Stoicism, not to retreat, but to remain upright when others collapse. Jocko Willink turns this into a battle cry. Turn emotion into execution, feel the frustration, then channel it into strategy. You don't yell at your team, you build a better process. You don't blast your partner, you have the courageous conversation. You don't stew in silence. You ask, what action aligns with my values and not my rage? Kevin Vost adds a final layer. Anger is like fire. It can warm a home or burn it down. The difference is discipline. And discipline in Stoicism isn't about coldness. It's about control with purpose. So next time you feel anger rise, don't fight it. Don't feed it. Forge it, because anyone can react. Only the wise can transform. Today you walked through fire, not to burn, but to forge. You discovered that anger, when left untamed, is chaos, but when mastered becomes courage. You saw how the Stoics, from Chrysippus to Musonius Rufus, from James Stockdale to Ryan Holiday, treated anger not as something to suppress, but as something to shape. You learned to distinguish what is in your control, to expect challenges before they arrive, to pause instead of react, to reinterpret offense, to see ignorance instead of evil, to remember the shortness of life, to strive for self-mastery, and finally, to turn your rage into righteous action. These are not abstract ideas, they are weapons, and the world will keep testing you. You will be disrespected, you will be provoked, you will be hurt. But now, you know how to stand your ground without losing your soul. That's Stoicism, that's freedom. That's the mission of the Stoic Lighthouse, to keep this ancient flame alive so it can guide you when everything around you turns dark. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what lesson in today's video struck you the hardest? Was it the idea of turning anger into strategy? Or the realization that most offenses only hurt because of how we interpret them? Or maybe it was something deeper. The silence between stimulus and response. We read every comment, and your insight might help someone else reclaim control over their emotions. Now, if this content spoke to you, don't forget to support the channel. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and share this video with someone who's been battling their inner fire. And if you want to continue walking this path of transformation, the next video is one you can't afford to miss. 6 brutal truths about anxiety that nobody tells you and how to break free today. We're going to expose what really fuels anxiety, why most advice fails, and how Stoic philosophy can help you conquer it, not by escaping, but by facing it with clarity, courage, and calm. And remember, you are not your anger. You are the one who decides what it becomes. See you in the next video.